In this training module, I'm going to show you how to draft the brief description section of your own provisional patent application. This includes reviewing what I focus on when I draft a brief description section of a patent application, as well as reviewing a sample brief description for the tool storage system we've looked at previously. By the end of this training module, you should be able to finish drafting the brief description section of your own patent specification. Let's get started. So here I've pulled up the template provisional patent application that I've provided to you, and we're looking at the brief description of the drawings section. So this section is optional. It's not required in a provisional patent application. I put it in there because it also serves as an outline for my description of the details of my invention later on. And so I find it's a really good way to start. You've already thought about the different types of drawings that you're going to include. You've created those drawings, and now you're just going to put a label essentially on each of those drawings as to what it shows. That way, when you go and you want to write your detailed description, you can just essentially copy this brief description down and start to fill out the details that go with each of those different illustrations or drawings. So I would highly recommend that you do include this section and use it as an outline for the detailed description section later on. You also might want to refer back to some of the other tools that we've talked about previously. For example, you'll probably want to refer back to the innovation disclosure form and some of the text that you put in there to describe the details of your invention that you had available at the time you filled out that form. You'll also want to look, of course, at your drawings that you created already and the order that you place those in. And sometimes you'll find that you place those in a certain order originally, but then you decided that you might want to rearrange them at this point. That's perfectly fine. Just go ahead and rearrange them, renumber them, relabel the drawings with the figure numbers, and go from there. It's not a big deal if you rearrange at this point. And in fact, you might find again, when you start doing your detailed description of the drawings, you might want to rearrange those drawings even one more time then. But what you're really doing is getting a draft and then refining that draft with each of these different sections going forward. And the changes in those revisions will become more and more trivial probably with each different section that you fill out of your patent application until you've completed all of the sections and are ready to file the application. Also, later in this training module, we're going to go through one of the patent applications that I've drafted for an invention that I think is pretty simple and straightforward, but we'll show you how the detailed description section would be filled out for my own patent application. Now, before we go look at the sample that I've provided for my own tool storage system invention, I want to mention a few more things. First of all, in this section of the patent application, I want you to focus on the different embodiments that are shown in the drawings. I want you to focus on the fact that these are simply examples of your overall invention. These aren't the invention itself necessarily. These are different ways that somebody could implement variations of your invention. And you want to keep that mindset in place because what you're trying to do is draw a protective border around your invention, not necessarily describe your invention by itself, but draw a protective border as broadly as you can while still describing an invention that's new and useful and unique in the way that it is made or operated. Similarly, focus on the fact that these are simply illustrations. These don't need to be manufacturing specification drawings. In fact, the rules for utility patent applications are very lenient. They specify that measurements don't necessarily mean anything. They specify that different types of surfaces might not be shown the same way. You really can describe whatever you want. So think of these as simply illustrations. Even if they're photographs of an embodiment of your invention, they're really still just illustrating different examples. They're not perfect, and that's just fine. So let's move on and look at the example that I've put together for you. So on the screen, you should see side by side both the brief description section that I've drafted, as well as the actual drawings that we put together and that you've seen previously. I want you to notice one thing in the specification document. I want you to notice that some of the text is blue and some of it is black. What I did here is I left the blue text in the same color as before, simply to show you the parts where I've left the same language from the template versus the parts where I've added my own language. So in this example and in the other examples that you'll see with different parts of the specification, the blue language is the language that I've just simply copied or imitated from the specification itself. And the black language is really where I've filled in some of the blanks. The other thing I want to point out is that I've kept this really short. It's really intended to be a brief description. At this point, just use it as an introduction to your drawing, not as an explanation of the drawing. Save that explanation for the detailed description that we'll go through later. So in this case, you can see on the left-hand side here, figures 1A and 1B, and I've numbered them 1A and 1B. You can number them 1 and 2, figures A and B. It really doesn't matter at this stage, as long as you can refer to those drawings and know which drawing you're looking at. Figure 1A illustrates one embodiment of a hinged tool storage system. And Figure 1b illustrates another arrangement of the hinged tool storage system of Figure 1. So you can refer back to other drawings if it helps to more quickly describe what you're showing in another drawing. And I don't want to necessarily go through all of these detailed descriptions because they are quite repetitive, but you can read these in your own time, pause the video, read what they are, what I've said there. You'll find that they follow a very similar pattern for each one. Figure 2a, which is shown here on the left, illustrates one embodiment of the hinged storage stand of Figure 1a in a horizontal position. And Figure 2b illustrates the hinged storage stand of Figure 2a in a vertical storage position. You don't necessarily need to be super precise as to what you're referring back to every time. I like to do it just to try to keep some continuity in the language of this patent application. It's my preference though, it's not a requirement. If you simply want to say Figure 2b illustrates one embodiment of a hinged storage stand in a vertical storage position, that's just fine too. Go ahead and do that. It's not that critical at this point that you are extremely precise, only that you're getting an introduction to each drawing and starting to create an outline for your later detailed description. You'll see down on Figure 5a, let's scroll down to that now, that I've copied here the same template language introducing a method drawing. So Figure 5a illustrates one embodiment of a method for using the hinged storage stand of Figure 2a to store yard tools. You see that I just have essentially filled in a couple of the blanks there, changed the template language to say what my invention is and what it does. Next, Figure 5b illustrates one embodiment of a method for storing the hinged storage stand of Figure 2a in a vertical position. So I tie those together so that I can create a better visual image or a better story of what my invention is and what it does. Lastly, down at the bottom after Figure 9, I've kept in some of the boilerplate language there. I think I might have actually moved this from another section of the patent application template, which is fine too. Really, as long as everything's in there, that's not a problem. To me, in this version, it sounded better to put it here, so I put other aspects and advantages of embodiments of the present invention will become apparent from the following detailed description, taken in conjunction with the accompanying drawings, illustrated by way of example of the principles of the invention. So this is the whole version of what I would produce for a patent application that has about 9 drawings, and I would just introduce each one really briefly. This probably took me 5 or 10 minutes to do because I already put a lot of work into creating my drawings and putting them in the order that I wanted to do. We talked about the drawing framework previously as to how I would arrange my drawings, and I do it so that it creates a better story when you go in and create the brief description, and more importantly, when you create the detailed description of your invention. So if you spend more than 5 or 10 minutes on this, maybe rethink the type of information you're putting in there. Just make sure it's an introduction of an example of a part of your invention and move on to the next one, and we'll fill in the details later on in the detailed description. And that's it. You should now be able to finalize the brief description for your own provisional patent application. Go ahead and do that now before moving on to the next module.